Now, if you follow my channel, I recently reviewed two of the newest laptops on the market, the Dell XPS 13 and the Apple MacBook Air, all new for 2020. And I like them both, but I've been getting a lot of requests to put them head to head in a showdown. And that's exactly what I did. Hey everybody, it's Andrew, and this is the showdown between the Dell XPS 13 2020 and the Apple MacBook Air 2020. Coming up. Today's video is brought to you by U2Key.com. Find out later in this video how you can save 15% off Microsoft Office and Windows 10 Professional OEM keys. Want to see more videos like this? Why not hit that subscribe button and make sure you hit that notification bell? This way you'll be alerted every time I post a new video. Make sure you follow me on social media, especially Twitter and Instagram, because that's where I post all the latest updates. And in the interest of transparency and full disclosure, I'm not being paid by Dell, I'm not being paid by Apple. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. No one is seeing this video before its release. Now, the review unit was on loan from Dell as far as the XPS 13 is concerned, and the MacBook Air was purchased with my own money. I did not receive a review unit from Apple. And with that out of the way, let's start the showdown. Both the Dell XPS 13 and the Apple MacBook Air have excellent hardware. Both are top-notch premium builds and quality. But there's something just a little bit better about Apple's build and construction over the Dell XPS 13 that I'm going to give it the nod. Don't get me wrong though, the XPS 13 is simply elegant and excellent in terms of build quality. But the Dell XPS 13 takes the design category, and for good reason, thanks to that frost white exterior with the glass woven fiber interior. It's simply beautiful. Now, when it comes to the displays, I think it's a tale of two cities. Now, the Dell XPS 13 has a 13.4-inch display, whereas the MacBook Air has a 13.3-inch display. They both have a 16:10 aspect ratio, which I do prefer over, say, something like the 16:9 aspect ratio. To me, that's the best blend between getting work done and consuming media. Now, as far as the display resolution, the MacBook Air has a higher resolution display, although it doesn't necessarily mean it's better. In fact, I prefer the Dell XPS 13. Not only does it look better, it's also a brighter display, coming in at 525 nits versus the 325 nits of the MacBook Air 2020. And I just seem to like the way the colors really pop more on the XPS 13's display as opposed to the MacBook Air's display. The black seemed deeper, and it just seems to really be more vibrant. And I like the option to have a touch display on my laptop, something that the Apple MacBook Air doesn't offer. So that to me is a big miss by Apple. And you can't help but notice the MacBook Air's rather large bezels. They look to me rather dated when you compare it to the Infinity Edge display of the XPS 13. That XPS 13's bezels are micro thin, and it gives it a really nice modern look. And when it comes to user upgradability, once again, the Dell gets the nod, and that's because you can upgrade the SSD, something you can't do on the MacBook Air because its storage and RAM, by the way, are soldered into the motherboard. Now, the XPS 13's RAM is also soldered into the motherboard, which is a miss on their part as well. But at least you can upgrade the storage, something you can't do with the Apple MacBook Air 2020. And speaking of storage, you get a micro SD card slot in the XPS 13, something you don't get with the MacBook Air. And when it comes to the SSD, I thought the reads and writes were better on the XPS 13. Now, neither laptop is going to win an award when it comes to the front-facing camera. In fact, they're really not good. Now, the Dell XPS 13 2020 has a front-facing camera that's 720p 30 frames per second. The Apple MacBook Air 2020 has a 720p FaceTime camera. Again, both are not great, but they will get the job done in a pinch, especially when you're working from home. Now, when it comes to the sound, I think they both have excellent speakers. I'm going to give the slight nod to the Apple MacBook Air. Once again, Apple does speakers very well. This is no exception. Now, the XPS 13 has bottom-facing speakers that have been improved as well. I thought they both did really well when it comes to the mids, bass, and of course, overall volume. They fill up the room rather nicely. But again, slight nod to the Apple MacBook Air. Now, before we get to the battery category, let's hear from today's sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by U2Key.com, your one-stop shop for Windows 10 Professional OEM keys, Microsoft Office keys, Steam CD keys, mini games, and so much more. And right now you can save 15% off if you use the discount code AUK15. That's a pretty good deal. So head on over to U2Key.com to get those special savings. And I want to thank U2Key for sponsoring today's video. Now when it comes to battery life, well, the Dell XPS 13 has a 52 watt-hour battery, whereas the Apple MacBook Air has a 49.9 watt-hour battery, and they both did really well on my continuous web surfing test, although the Dell XPS 13 outpaced the MacBook Air. You got 10 hours and 12 minutes, whereas the Apple MacBook Air did 9 hours and 32 minutes. Both all-day battery life, both excellent results. The MacBook Air comes with a 30-watt USB-C power adapter and took 2 hours and 8 minutes for a full charge, whereas the XPS 13 comes with a 45-watt USB-C power adapter and it charged in less than 2 hours, which is really good. Now when it comes to performance, Dell is going to get the nod here, of course, but as I mentioned in a recent live stream, this is not really a fair comparison in that regard because this really competes more directly with the MacBook Pro 13 as opposed to this MacBook Air. But having said that, of course, you're going to get the better results out of that Core i7 as opposed to the Core i5, and certainly better than the Core i3 that we took a look at with this MacBook Air. And another reason why the XPS 13 has an advantage over the MacBook Air is that it's using the 15-watt variant of the Ice Lake processor as opposed to the more limited 10-watt variant that Apple chose to put in the new MacBook Air. Now when it comes to wireless, the nod goes to the Dell XPS 13 because it's running Killer Wireless 6 with Bluetooth 5.0. The Apple MacBook Air unfortunately is running the Wi-Fi 5, which is not going to be as future-proof as the XPS 13 in that regard. And that's the reason I'm going to give the nod to the XPS 13. Now when it comes to thermals, I'm going to give the nod to the Dell XPS 13. The dual fans, the better heat sinks, it's much better in that laptop than it is on the MacBook Air. The problem with the MacBook Air is that it only has one fan and the heat sink is insufficient. And the fact of the matter is it gets very hot when you're doing certain tasks such as video editing or gaming or when you're really pushing it. Everyday tasks seem to be fine. There's no real issue of it overheating or anything like that. It does get very warm though, and that's something to keep in mind. The nod goes to the Dell XPS 13. Now, when it comes to the keyboard, I like both, but I'm going to give the nod to the MacBook Air with its improved Magic Keyboard, a much better keyboard than its predecessor, the Butterfly keyboard. As for the XPS 13, I think they did a really good job when it comes to key travel, good tactile feedback, but I just like the MacBook Air's keyboard a little bit better. And I'm also going to give a slight nod to the MacBook Air when it comes to the touchpad. Once again, Apple's hit a home run when it comes to a responsive touchpad that has excellent two-finger scrolling and it works really well with gestures. Now, don't get me wrong, I really like the XPS 13's touchpad. It's a precision touchpad and it worked really well. Two-finger scrolling was buttery smooth. All the Windows 10 gestures worked as advertised. Okay, let's wrap it all up. Let's give the design, display, ports, user upgradability, performance, battery, and thermals all go to the Dell XPS 13 2020. The MacBook Air wins hardware, keyboard, touchpad, audio, and price to value ratio, if you can believe that. You know, Apple's known to be very expensive, but this time around they came in with a very affordable $999 starting price, whereas the XPS 13 starts at a very high $1,250. And with a final score of 8-5, the Dell XPS 13 2020 is the winner in this showdown. Now, I'm curious to know what you think. Let me know in the comment section below. What would be your winner? I am curious to know. So what do you think about these two bad boys, the Apple MacBook Air for 2020, the Dell XPS 13 for 2020? Both very good, but of course the winner is the Dell XPS 13, and for good reason. It's got better processor, of course, and like I said in my live streams recently, and like I said in the reviews, this is more of a competitor to the MacBook Pro 13, but I've been getting so many requests to put these head to head that I felt compelled to do it. But this is a really good choice, of course. Build quality is excellent. You get the really good CPU, 10th generation Ice Lake processor, Core i7, and in this model, you get the Intel Iris Plus graphics, the more stepped up version of those graphics, which you really like. Sound is very good with the speakers on the bottom. It still sounds great, even though the MacBook Air did sound better. and I thought that the battery life was better, giving you 10 plus hours of mixed use versus the 9.5 hours you get with the MacBook Air. Again, both very good, both all-day battery life. This comes with a 45-watt charger. The MacBook Air comes with a 30-watt charger. This charges a little bit faster, so that is an advantage to the Dell XPS 13. As far as the display, I prefer the Full HD Plus display, Infinity Edge display with the smaller bezels on this XPS 13. Four-sided Infinity Edge display, which is absolutely gorgeous. I like the fact that you can get a touch display with this, something you can't get with the MacBook Air, or the Pro for that matter. So I like what this offers. Now, if you want to step it up to a UHD Plus resolution, you have that option, especially if you want to do some video editing, especially if you want to do Photoshop or color grading. This will give you that option. The MacBook Pro does not. Doesn't have a higher resolution than the one that's offered in the Air. So I got to give the nod, of course, to the Dell XPS 13. Although it is a little bit more expensive than the MacBook Air, I think it competes more directly, of course, with the MacBook Pro 13, which is, of course, in need of a dire refresh, which we are certainly expecting later this year. But this is definitely my winner for this showdown between these two recently released ultra portables. So please hit the like button, please subscribe, please share this video. Don't forget to leave a comment in that comment section below. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know if there's a device or something out there you think I should review. I'll do my best to try to make that happen. Don't forget to check me out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course my website, amdtechreviews.com. So until next time, this is Andrew from AMD Tech. See ya.